In a sleepy mountain town where secrets rarely surface, one gunshot exposed a lie so horrifying it shook an entire community. A father, a brother, a daughter, and a truth too dark to stay buried. Nestled deep within the sweeping, often mist-shrouded mountains of the Sierra Verde region lies Las Cumbres. It's the kind of isolated town where time seems to meander, dictated more by the coffee harvest seasons than any clock. Steep slopes, patchworked with vibrant green coffee bushes and the simpler textures of subsistence crops, climb towards dramatic peaks. The air often carries the rich scent of roasting beans, a comforting aroma that speaks of hard work and a predictable, cyclical existence. Reaching Las Cumbres required navigating treacherous mountain roads, further sealing it off from the hurried pace of the outside world. Here, tranquility isn't just a feeling, it's woven into the very fabric of the place. Or so it appears. Among the families calling this rugged landscape home were the Morenos. Ricardo Moreno, a man whose hands bore the permanent stains of the earth he worked, embodied the stoic resilience of the region's farmers. His wife, Elena, though not born to this life, had adapted, raising their daughters amidst the demanding rhythms of rural life. Their eldest, Sofia, was growing into womanhood, carrying the quiet diligence expected in Las Cumbres, a young woman on the cusp, carrying not just diligence but perhaps unspoken burdens too. Like many families here, their lives unfolded under the watchful eyes of neighbors and the strictures of tradition. On the surface, they were just another peasant family, their lives defined by planting, harvesting, and the simple challenges of making ends meet in this remote corner of the world. A picture of hard-working simplicity. But even in the most serene settings, shadows can lengthen unnoticed. Appearances, especially in tight-knit communities, can be deceivingly thin veils. Beneath the veneer of normalcy, hidden secrets sometimes fester, twisting the bonds of family into something unrecognizable. It's strange how darkness can find fertile ground in the quietest corners, twisting loyalties until they snap. Was the peace in Las Cumbres as complete as it seemed? What tensions simmered beneath the polite greetings exchanged on the dusty village paths? Around 2015, the quiet rhythm of the Moreno family's life began to falter, almost imperceptibly at first. The carefully constructed calm that defined their existence started to fracture, hinting at a devastating truth poised to shatter their world completely. Understanding the tragedy that followed requires a closer look at the intricate, often unspoken dynamics binding this family together. To truly grasp the forces at play within the Moreno family, one must understand the individuals shaped by the demanding environment of Las Cumbres. At its center stood Ricardo Moreno, a man seemingly forged from the very soil he relentlessly farmed. Decades he'd spent working the small plot his family had passed down, his peasant life marked by the sweat of harvests, coffee, oranges, whatever the land would yield. There was a rough cheerfulness to him, quick to surface during village fiestas, but beneath it lay a sternness, a rigid expectation of duty and respect within his own home. His word was law. He loved his daughters, he often said, fiercely protective, offering gruff advice born from a life of hardship. Beside him was Elena Moreno. Originally from the bustling port city of Puerto Alto, her life had taken an unexpected turn years ago. An early pregnancy had hastened a union with Ricardo, transplanting her from urban familiarity to the stark, isolating beauty of the Sierra Verde mountains. She adapted, as one must, finding a quiet rhythm in the domestic routines and the raising of their children, though perhaps a flicker of her past life sometimes surfaced in her eyes during quiet moments. Their marriage, built on circumstance and shared struggle, presented a facade of stability, free from overt conflict. The family unit extended slightly beyond their immediate walls. Nearby lived Mateo Moreno, Ricardo's younger brother. 40 years old, Mateo navigated the world with a mind that remained childlike due to a mental disability. He lived just meters away, allowing Ricardo and Elena to keep a watchful eye. Mateo was a gentle soul, finding joy in simple things, the feel of smooth stones, the imaginary gallop of a stick horse. He shared what little he had freely. Crucially, he shared a special, uncomplicated bond with his nieces, especially Sofia Moreno. She treated her Uncle Mateo with a patience and affection that bypassed his sometimes confusing expressions, understanding the kind heart within. As Sofia blossomed into a young woman, Ricardo's protective instincts intensified, bordering on controlling. He watched her closely, his advice perhaps turning into warnings. There was fear in his vigilance, fear of the outside world, fear of losing control in the unpredictable path of adolescence. Yet, Sofia seemed sensible, a daughter unlikely to cause trouble, her parents believed. Their days settled into a predictable pattern, Ricardo working the fields, Elena managing the home, Sofia and her sisters helping where needed, sometimes spending time with their Uncle Mateo. It was a simple, demanding, and seemingly normal peasant life. Their world operated on predictable cycles, grounded in the earth and family ties, seemingly secure. Until one of those cycles went unexpectedly, terribly wrong. That fragile stability, however, began to crack in the spring of 2015. It started subtly. Sofia Moreno, once diligent and present, grew listless. She stopped wanting to go to school, complaining of vague illnesses. Her appetite dwindled, and a noticeable weight gain began to alter her young frame. Elena watched her daughter retreat, a growing unease tightening in her chest. Simple questions about what was wrong were met with shrugs, mumbled denials, or worse, a heavy, impenetrable silence. The easy connection they once shared felt strained, replaced by a distance Elena couldn't bridge. Night after night, Elena lay awake, the silence of the house amplifying her fears. Worry gnawed at her. This wasn't just teenage moodiness, something was fundamentally wrong. Finally, unable to ignore the changes any longer, Elena took Sofia to the small clinic in the village. The examination felt routine, the air thick with antiseptic and unspoken maternal anxiety. The doctor's initial words brought a confusing mix of relief and apprehension. Sofia wasn't sick in the conventional sense. But then came the shocking discovery, delivered with clinical detachment yet landing like a physical blow: Sofia was pregnant. The clinical words shattered the fragile normalcy Elena clung to. The diagnosis hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. How? Elena struggled to reconcile the word with the image of her quiet, sensible daughter. Sofia visibly recoiled, drawing into herself as if seeking protection from the very air around her. She seemed to shrink further into silence, her eyes wide with a fear that went beyond youthful embarrassment. And cases involving an underage pregnancy, especially in contexts where abuse is a potential factor, established child protection protocols are immediately triggered. The news quickly reached the local family commissioner, who, following procedure, contacted Dr. Isabella Rossi, a psychologist specializing in child welfare and trauma. Dr. Rossi understood the delicate nature of such situations. Her first meeting with Sofia confirmed the complexity. The girl was painfully reserved, her answers brief and evasive. She spoke vaguely of waking one morning feeling physically unwell, noticing something strange about her body, but offered nothing more. It wasn't the typical confusion or anxiety of a teenage pregnancy. Dr. Rossi sensed something deeper, a profound fear that held Sofia captive. It wasn't just shame or nervousness, it felt primal, a terror rooted in something immediate and ongoing. This case, she suspected, would test her skills and resilience. The silence was a wall, thick with unspoken terror. Unlocking it would require more than gentle questions, it would demand delving into the heart of the Moreno family's hidden world, a task that would prove fraught with difficulty and misdirection. That profound fear Dr. Rossi sensed became a major obstacle as the formal investigation commenced under Detective Valeria Cruz. Cruz was sharp, experienced in navigating the complexities of crimes against minors, but the wall of silence surrounding Sofia Moreno presented an immediate challenge. Arriving in the isolated town of Las Cumbres, one of Cruz's first considerations, driven by the palpable fear radiating from Sofia and the assessment by Dr. Rossi, was the potential need to remove the girl from her home environment. The suspicion was strong. The perpetrator wasn't some random outsider but likely someone within the immediate family circle. Highlighting this risk were the Moreno family's precarious living conditions, a small, overcrowded house where privacy was non-existent, multiple family members sharing just 2 beds, fostering an environment where boundaries could easily blur. Sofia remained mute, trapped behind eyes that mirrored sheer terror. Her father, Ricardo Moreno, however, offered a narrative, vague stories about strangers, shadowy figures who supposedly accosted his daughter on a lonely path from school. But Detective Cruz, like Dr. Rossi, found the explanation thin. Sophia's demeanor didn't align with the trauma of a random attack. It screamed of intimate betrayal, of shielding someone terrifyingly close. The investigation needed answers, and Sophia's silence created a void easily filled by whispers and circumstantial evidence. Attention began to subtly shift towards the periphery, towards Ricardo's brother, the gentle, childlike Mateo Moreno. An aunt, perhaps hesitant, shared observations with Cruz. Mateo, in his simple way, could be overly affectionate with young women, sometimes buying small, inexpensive gifts like nail polish. His interest perhaps naive but potentially misconstrued. Community members confirmed Mateo often sought out the company of Sophia and her sisters. Even Sophia herself had mentioned, seemingly innocently, Mateo's awkward crush on another local girl, Isabel. Then came Ricardo's own comment about a neighbor warning him that Mateo had once overstepped his boundaries with Sophia, a claim that reportedly angered Ricardo deeply. Detective Cruz attempted to interview Mateo directly, a frustrating endeavor complicated by his mental disability. He responded like a child, easily distracted, unable to grasp the gravity of the questions, his confusion potentially appearing as evasion. He was vulnerable, different, and lived practically next door. Piece by piece, through hearsay and an observation, without a single direct accusation from Sophia, circumstantial evidence began to paint Mateo Moreno as the prime suspect. The focus of the investigation started to dangerously narrow, zeroing in on the family's most defenseless member. With suspicion consolidating around the vulnerable Mateo, the true predator remained hidden, and the fragile piece of Los Cumbres was unknowingly ticking towards another, more violent, explosion. While investigators wrestled with Sophia's silence and the growing, yet unsubstantiated, suspicion surrounding Mateo Moreno, the simmering tension in Los Cumbres reached its breaking point. The date was July 22, 2015. It was a deceptively ordinary afternoon, the mountain air heavy and still, the usual tranquility settling over the slopes as the day began to cool. But that peace was violently ripped apart by a single, sharp explosion, a gunshot echoing unnervingly through the quiet valleys. The sound startled birds and silenced the cicadas. It was a sound horribly out of place. Calls flooded the small local police outpost. Officer Daniela Rios was dispatched to respond. Several residents reported the shot originating near the Moreno family farm. One neighbor, Juan Perez, already heading that way cautiously, arrived first. What he saw sent a jolt of horror through him. Just meters from the modest Moreno farmhouse, sprawled unnaturally on the dirt path, was a body. Blood pooled beneath it, stark against the earth tones of the ground. It was immediately clear this was a homicide. Officer Rios arrived moments later, her police training kicking in as she took in the grim scene and began securing the area. The body was male, lying face down, limbs slightly drawn in the genipectoral position, often indicative of a person collapsing instantly from the shock and pain of a close-range impact. As protocols were followed and the scene processed, family members gathered, drawn by the commotion and a dawning dread. When the body was carefully turned, gasps of shock and cries of grief erupted. It was Mateo Moreno, Ricardo's brother, Sophia's gentle uncle. The man who, just hours before, had been the focus of Detective Cruz's difficult investigation. The news hit the Moreno family like a physical blow. Disbelief warred with horror. Why Mateo? Who would target him? Initial thoughts, perhaps inevitably in this region historically touched by conflict, might have drifted towards unknown assailants, a tragic consequence of straying into the wrong place at the wrong time. But something felt different. The proximity to the family home, the brutal finality of the close-range shot, it suggested something more personal, more targeted. A chilling mystery now enveloped Los Cumbres. The investigation into Sophia's plight had just violently collided with a homicide. The prime suspect was dead. And the questions hanging over the Moreno family deepened into something far more sinister. The brutal homicide of Mateo Moreno threw the ongoing investigation into Sofia's plight into chaos, but it also forced investigators to look at the Moreno family with fresh, albeit horrified, eyes. Officer Daniela Rios, leading the homicide case, quickly conferred with Detective Valeria Cruz. The fact that the murder victim was the prime suspect in the parallel abuse investigation was a chilling convergence, immediately suggesting the two cases were inextricably linked. Were they somehow connected? Was Mateo silenced? As Rios and Cruz began sharing information, pooling resources, a disturbing picture started to emerge, further reinforced when Elena mentioned how visibly terrified Sofia had become upon learning of her uncle Mateo's violent death. Then came the breakthrough, the pivotal piece that began to unravel the tangled threads. Sofia's cousin, Camila Moreno, came forward, shaken but resolute. She recounted her experience on the day of the murder. Set out to gather firewood, she had been returning home near the Moreno property when the sharp crack of a shotgun echoed nearby. Turning instinctively towards the sound, she saw her uncle, Ricardo Moreno, standing not far off, shotgun in hand, the breech perhaps still open. At that exact moment, she hadn't suspected anything sinister. Ricardo often hunted small game with that gun. It was familiar. But later that morning, when frantic news spread through Los Cumbres that Mateo had been found shot dead right near that spot, the image of Ricardo with the shotgun flashed back into her mind with sudden, sickening clarity. Investigators listened intently. Brother killing brother? It seemed unthinkable, especially within the tight confines of family loyalty in a place like Los Cumbres. But Camila wasn't finished. She added another crucial detail. She, along with other neighbors, had witnessed Ricardo threatening Mateo publicly just the day before the homicide. Mateo himself, she revealed, had confided his fear of being blamed for Sofia's pregnancy and had spoken of wanting to leave Los Cumbres altogether. Suddenly, a potential motive clicked into place, silencing Mateo before he could talk, or perhaps an act of twisted revenge based on Ricardo's suspicions. The investigation intensified its focus on Ricardo. A methodical search of the area around the crime scene soon yielded results: Ricardo's shotgun, clumsily hidden in the foliage of a nearby tree. His explanation that he hid it merely as a precaution rang hollow. The final, damning piece of evidence came from the ballistics lab. Tests confirmed that the projectiles recovered from Mateo's body were fired from Ricardo Moreno's hidden shotgun. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Witness testimony, motive, and now the murder weapon itself, the homicide investigation had found its target. Authorities moved swiftly to obtain an arrest warrant for Ricardo Moreno. Armed with the warrant backed by damning evidence, Officer Rios and Detective Cruz moved to apprehend Ricardo Moreno at his farm. The arrest itself was unnervingly straightforward. Faced with the officers and the warrant for aggravated homicide, Ricardo showed no resistance, no surprise, almost no emotion at all. His composure was chilling. When questioned about the death of his brother, his confession was immediate, delivered with a calm detachment that stunned the investigators. Yes, he admitted coolly, he had killed Mateo. He'd shot him. Just like that. But when pressed for the reason, his openness vanished, replaced by evasiveness, perhaps a muttered justification hinting that Mateo had crossed lines, implicitly validating the very suspicions the investigators had initially held. News of Ricardo's arrest and his murder confession ripped through Los Cumbres. Almost instantly, the narrative took hold: Ricardo had killed Mateo to avenge his daughter, Sofia. He was defending his family's honor. Whispers turned into murmurs of approval. Some even saw his act as a form of rough, necessary vigilantism in their isolated world. He was perceived not as a murderer, but as a wronged father taking justice into his own hands. The tragic irony was unbearable. For Sofia, already grappling with the trauma of her uncle's death and the weight of her own secret, hearing these rumors, hearing her abuser lauded as a hero for killing the man wrongly suspected, became the final, breaking straw. The injustice screamed louder than her fear. Seeing her mother, Elena, lost in a fog of grief and confusion, trying to reconcile the town's narrative with the lingering questions, Sofia reached her limit. In a moment charged with anguish, Elena perhaps pleaded with her daughter, sensing something profoundly wrong beneath the surface justifications. "Sophia, please," she might have begged, tears streaming, "tell me the real truth. What truly happened?" And then, the dam broke. The carefully constructed wall of silence, held together by months of terror, finally crumbled. Haltingly at first, then with a torrent of pain and fear, Sofia Moreno confessed. The words tumbled out, shattering the air, shattering Elena's world. "It wasn't Tio Mateo," she sobbed, the revelation tearing through her. "It wasn't him. It was Papa." She recounted the nightmare, the abuse by her own father, the constant fear, the threats against her, her mother, her sisters, that kept her mouth shut for so long. The confession struck Elena like lightning, a visceral blow that left her staggering, the ground beneath her feet giving way to an abyss of horror. The horrifying truth finally lay exposed, raw and bleeding. The carefully constructed lies evaporated, leaving only the unbearable reality. The investigation had just pivoted on its axis, forcing everyone to confront the monster who had lived among them all along. With Sofia's devastating confession hanging heavy in the air, the image of Ricardo Moreno shifted irrevocably from misunderstood vigilante to calculated predator. The horrifying truth forced investigators, and indeed the shattered family, to re-examine the man they thought they knew, uncovering a disturbing history hidden beneath the veneer of the hard-working farmer. This wasn't a sudden aberration. Testimonies emerged painting a picture of Ricardo's long-standing controlling nature, punctuated by bursts of domestic violence, particularly when fueled by alcohol, fists raised against his wife, Elena, and his daughters. More chillingly, whispers surfaced about an incident years prior, after his own father's death, where Ricardo allegedly crossed unthinkable boundaries with his grieving mother, making her feel profoundly uncomfortable and disrespected, treating her not as a parent but as something else entirely. She had reportedly attempted to file a complaint, but in the closed community of Los Cumbres, nothing came of it. This history cast a dark shadow over his interrogation following Sofia's abuse disclosure. Confronted with the specifics of his actions against his daughter, Ricardo's earlier cold composure regarding Mateo's murder fractured, replaced by evasiveness and jarring inconsistencies. He offered vague justifications, mumbling about temptation, about being confused, about not understanding what had happened. There was no accountability, no flicker of empathy for the terror and pain he had inflicted on Sofia. His attempts to shift blame or minimize his actions were starkly contrasted by his insistence that he was just a normal person, albeit without formal education, who had never suffered any mental difficulties. To the seasoned investigators listening, each denial, each self-serving explanation, felt more disconcerting, revealing a profound lack of remorse, a hardened heart seemingly incapable of recognizing the monstrousness of his deeds. The subsequent trial in the courts of Puerto Alto was relatively swift. Faced with his daughter's harrowing testimony, his own confession to the homicide, and the weight of the collected evidence, Ricardo Moreno accepted the charges brought against him: aggravated homicide for the murder of his brother, Mateo, and the severe charges relating to the prolonged abuse of his daughter, Sofia. The sentence handed down was substantial: 27 years imprisonment. By then, public opinion had solidified, branding him the monster of Los Cumbres. Reports suggested that when the nickname reached him, his reaction was one of bewildered incomprehension, still utterly detached from the gravity of his crimes. Justice, and its legal form, had been served. Ricardo Moreno was behind bars. But for the shattered remnants of his family, the sentence offered little solace against the deep, irreparable wounds he had inflicted. While Ricardo Moreno began serving his sentence, locked away from the world he had devastated, the consequences for his family were only just beginning to unfold. The legal justice meted out could not undo the profound damage, nor could it erase the deep scars left by his actions. For Elena and her daughters, the man they knew ceased to exist the moment Sofia's harrowing truth came to light. There was no forgiveness, only a stark disownment, a necessary severing to protect what little remained of their fractured lives. As one daughter later expressed, the fathers she loved effectively died that day, replaced by the horrifying reality of the monster who had shared their home for years. His presence was wiped clean from their future. Sophia, barely more than a child herself, faced an unimaginably difficult path forward. She carried the immense trauma of prolonged abuse, the guilt and grief surrounding her uncle Mateo's murder, a death possibly precipitated by the secret he carried for her, and the ultimate betrayal by her own father. Now, she also faced motherhood, the impending birth inextricably linked to her horrific ordeal. Her emotions were a tangled knot of contradictions, perhaps a flicker of maternal connection mixed with the overwhelming sadness and revulsion tied to the child's origins. How does one navigate such a complex emotional landscape at such a young age? Amidst the wreckage, it became crucial to remember Mateo Moreno not as the wrongly suspected figure he briefly became, but as the innocent victim caught in his brother's web of deceit and violence. He was the gentle soul, the playful uncle, perhaps the only person Sophia felt she could confide in. His death was a direct consequence of knowing too much, of being a potential witness in a household ruled by silence and fear. His simple, cheerful legacy deserved to be honored, rescued from the shadow of false accusation. The tragedy of the Moreno family serves as a chilling reminder that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows of fairy tales. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, within the very places meant to offer safety and love. It underscores the devastating power of silence in abuse cases, how fear can become a prison, allowing perpetrators to operate unchecked. It highlights the profound vulnerability of children and the enduring, complex consequences of trauma that ripple through lives long after the immediate events have passed. The scars of silence run deep, and the echoes of loss linger indefinitely.